All right, hello everybody. We're going to start covering the anatomy of the muscular system, and we're going to start off with the craniofacial and neck muscles. So that's why I have a muscle head up here for us to start off with. As we go through the anatomy of the muscular system, I'm going to be using a program called Muscle Premium by Visible Body. So this is not the regular Visible Body. The reason I'm using this is it provides some more detailed information about the muscles, which will help me as I'm going over this with you. You don't necessarily need to purchase that program. If you're using the regular version of Visible Body, that'll be great for the muscles. And if you have not purchased that, the free 3D anatomy apps that I linked back at the beginning of the course, also over in the Start Here area on Blackboard, if you haven't started using one of those yet, all of the free ones should be great for the muscles as well. And then as we go through these, all right, so if you follow along in your study guide, there are about 40 muscles. Now there are a whole lot more skeletal muscles than that are part of the muscular system. We're only requiring you to know about 40 of the major superficial muscles. So those are all listed for you, those things that you see there that are underlined and italicized. Those are muscle names. Many of those names will be familiar to you because they are similar to bone names, or they are named according to body regions. Some of the action terms that we've just covered on the last video lecture, etc. And then as you go through there, you're going to see L, an abbreviation L that stands for location. It's letting you know where the muscle is located. A is action, and so you do need to learn the actions for the muscles that are listed there, and I'll ask you those as probably multiple choice, maybe multiple answer questions, one or two of those on the anatomy test. So you do need to know those for the anatomy side in Unit 4. And then another thing, occasionally in there you're going to see listed antagonists and synergists. Antagonists are muscles or muscle groups that do opposite movements. For example, flexion of the elbow versus extension. There are different muscles that pull on bones to cause flexion or extension of the elbow. Those would be called antagonists. Muscles that help each other do the same movement are called synergists. And we'll see some examples of those. There are only a few in there. Only the ones that are listed on the study guide here are the ones that you would have to know for the anatomy test. And then finally, there are some origins and insertions. So let me talk a little bit about what that means before we move on. So probably for all of the muscles, I'm going to point out to us their origin or origins and their insertion point or their insertions. So as we've learned before, your muscles are connected to bones usually through dense, regular connective tissue structures. Very often it's a tendon, which is a rope-like dense, regular connective tissue structure that's discussed over on the physiology side. Or in other cases, you have sheets of dense, regular connective tissues that help attach muscles to bones. Muscles tend to extend across joints from one bone to another, and when the muscle contracts, it's going to shorten. So the whole muscle is going to do this as those individual muscle fibers undergo their actin and myosin sliding that you're learning about over on the physiology side. So the origin of a muscle is the point on the muscle that remains stationary during contraction. The insertion or the insertion points, those are the parts that move or get pulled during a contraction. All right, so for example, we think about the biceps brachii muscle here, which is located on the forearm, on the anterior side of the, on the anterior side of the upper arm. When it contracts, that muscle is going to shorten as the muscle fibers in there go through their contraction process. That muscle is attached to the upper part of the humerus and also some other areas around the shoulder joint. Okay, and that's the origin of the biceps brachii muscle. The insertion is down on the radial tuberosity. If you remember that little bump below the inferior to the circular head of the radius, there's a tendon that extends from the biceps brachii muscle down to the radial tuberosity. So think about it. If your biceps brachii muscle is doing this, the origin is up here. This is staying stationary. The radial tuberosity is getting pulled, and that's going to cause you to flex your elbow. So that's how muscles work. Muscles pull on bones. That's another thing I want you guys to get used to thinking about. They don't push. Push with a line through it. Muscles, think about it, your muscle fibers, you're learning about that on the physiology side, they shorten. So what's a muscle going to do? It's going to pull on a bone. They don't elongate during contraction. They're not going to push bones back into place. So when you do something like flex your elbow, there are muscles on this side of the upper arm that cooperate with each other to allow that to happen. When you extend the elbow like this, your triceps brachii muscles over on the posterior side of the upper arm pull on the forearm to allow you to extend your elbow joint, to open up that angle there. So get used to thinking about muscles always pull on bones. They don't push. Sometimes if you're looking at some animations on the internet for these muscle actions, they're going to show you things like, okay, what's the biceps brachii muscle? What's the action? And they're going to show you something like this, where it's going back and forth and going back and forth. And so you just have to be really careful about what actually is the movement of the muscle you're talking about. Because when they're showing you this back and forth, that can give you the wrong impression that a particular muscle is pushing and pulling, doing opposite movements at joints, and that does not happen. All right, so now that I've given you my little sermon there on origins and insertions, we'll talk about these probably for every one of the muscles. And if you look through your study guide, you'll see some O and I for a few of them. Those are the only ones that we require you to know. So don't get stressed out over origins and insertions. I'm going to point them out to you as we go through the muscles because it helps you visualize the actions if you can picture in your head the muscle and what part's staying stationary and what part is moving as they undergo their contractions. But I'm not going to test you on any of those except for the ones listed in your study guide. All right, so let me clear the board here. So we're going to start going through the craniofacial and neck muscles. They're in the study guide, and the first two are listed as the occipitalis and the frontalis. Now you can probably figure out where those are based on their names because we've heard that terminology before. Hang on. Goodbye. Okay, let's talk about the occipitalis first. So if I rotate this head around to the back, guess where the occipitalis muscle is located? You can see this reddish tissue here indicates a muscle. I want you to notice also the grain of the muscle. That's indicating the direction that the muscle fibers run in, those long cylinder-shaped cells that you're learning about over on the physiology side. That's going to be important for visualizing the movement of the muscle. All right, so let me turn on multiple highlight here. Okay, so I'm highlighting the occipitalis muscle back here, but notice also if I rotate the head this way, I've also highlighted, let me deselect this for a second. It also highlighted this gray tissue over the top of the head. That is an aponeurosis. If you haven't seen that yet from over on the physiology side. Aponeurosis. That is a flat sheet of dense regular connective tissue which helps attach muscles to bones. Aponeuroses is plural, and it's kind of like a flat tendon that's just ironed out and very flat. All right, if I highlight that again, I want to rotate the face forward now, and I want you to notice that it also highlighted these muscle tissues around the forehead, and that's your frontalis muscle. But many sources consider these two muscles work together, and so many sources just refer to them as one muscle as listed there in your study guide. That can be called the occipitofrontalis with this aponeurosis there in between. So you can consider those as separate muscles, but really they function together as one unit in many ways. So let's think about what's going on here with the occipitalis muscle. I'm going to highlight for you the origins and insertions. So these little red pins here are showing you the origins of the occipitalis portion of the muscle. So that's the part when this muscle is contracting that's going to stay stationary. And up here the blue pins are showing you insertion locations. So it's really inserted here along this line. It's not only at those particular little pins. That's just giving you an idea about where the muscle is actually inserted, attached to the occipital bone there. So think about the movement. I mean, if the muscle origin is here, that's the part that's going to stay stationary when this muscle is contracting. Insertion up here, that's what's going to get pulled on. And then the grain of the muscle is running this way, superior to inferior. So what's going to happen? As that muscle does this, it shortens. It's pulling on this aponeurosis. So it actually winds up pulling on the scalp, pulls the scalp backwards. All right, let me rotate back around here to this side. If I highlight those little red pins there and over there, those are, all right, now I know the muscle premium here is calling these the origins. They actually have this backwards for this particular muscle. Those are the insertion points for the frontalis portion of the muscle. They're in the soft tissues around the eyebrows and just above the nose. And this is actually your origin back in here, the blue markers, which are up there connecting into that aponeurosis sheet. The fibers there are running up and down. So what's going to happen? This part stays stationary. This part gets pulled because our fibers are running up and down. So guess what this muscle does? It helps you elevate your eyebrows. If you look on your study guide, that's what it says. Action of the frontalis is to elevate your eyebrows. And again, this part and this part back here work together. And if you really push up on your eyebrows, you can actually feel your occipitalis muscle in the back of your head contracting because it's getting involved in that movement as well. Let's see, I'm going to clear my pens. Oops. All right, let me zoom back into my head here for a second. All right, another thing I wanted to point out, this muscle premium program lets me highlight left and right separately. And this kind of gets into a genetic difference type thing from person to person. Some of us can operate the left side of the frontalis by itself without moving the right-hand side. Some of us can do the right and not the left. Some of us can't do either one, and some of us can operate both independently. So if you can do something like this with your eyebrows, like I can elevate my left eyebrow with the left side of my frontalis, whereas I can't do that with the right. And you might be able to do right and not left, or you might not be able to do either one. That independent operation is a genetic type thing that differs from person to person. Just a little trivia there. Next muscle here, cranial, facial, and neck group. Rotate our head around this way. All right, and I'm actually going to hide that muscle. That's one that's a minor muscle you don't need to know. Same deal with that one, the auricularis anterior. We're going to hide that. The next one you guys need to know is the temporalis, this pretty large muscle that overlies the temporal bone. Kind of looks like a shell. And notice how the fibers are running. They're all converging almost like a shell toward this point over here. This is the temporalis. And let's look at the origins and the insertions. The origins, it is embedded into the temporal bone over here. So this is the part that's going to stay stationary when this muscle contracts. And then your insertion point is over here, and that's actually on the coronoid process of the mandible, if you remember that from your bone anatomy. Hopefully you do. So when this muscle contracts, the fibers pull on the coronoid process of the mandible. So if your jaw is down like that, temporalis muscle contracts, pulls up on that coronoid process, and you're going to elevate your mandible. That's going to be the action. Elevation is a superior motion of a bone. So this is one that you use in chewing. When you're chewing, you elevate and depress your jaw. Well, the temporalis muscle is one of the ones that helps you elevate the mandible. You can tell that too. If you really clench your jaw tight, you can feel the temporalis muscle contracting there on the side of the head. You can feel that. Because when you clench your jaws, you're really super elevating the mandible, pressing those bottom teeth up against the upper teeth. All right, let's look at our next one right there. That is called the masseter muscle. And just like the temporalis, you do have a temporalis, of course, over on the right side as well, and you do have a masseter over on the right side as well. So that is running right over that portion of the mandible that runs up and down that you learned about when you studied the skeletal system. So let's take a look at our origins and insertions for this. So your origin up in here in this location, and your insertion is down here on the lower part of the mandible. And so this, and look how the fibers are running. The grain is running up and down. So when you contract the masseter, this also is going to elevate the mandible. Okay, so your temporalis and your masseter muscles cooperate with each other for elevating the mandible. They help you with chewing, grinding the teeth, pressing the teeth together very tightly. All right, well, that's gotten us started with just a few of the skeletal muscles. I don't want to make this particular video too long, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this one off, and then we'll pick up with the additional bones from the craniofacial and neck region on the next video lecture.